Good morning. I'm Mark Glorioso, Chairman of Partnership and Institute. With me today are two distinguished guests in the Space Center. John Bailey, Deputy Director at the Center, and Michael McDaniel, General Manager of Aerojet Rocket Lab. Today, we want to give you an update on the recent hot fire test and the next test coming up. John, I was there just outside the North Gate when the first hot fire went off on January 28th for the stage test for the SLS. Tell us, why are these tests so important to help power the agency's Space Launch System rocket on future missions to the Moon and eventually to Mars? And what did we learn from the first hot fire test?
Okay, first of all, Mark, thanks for having me today. I really appreciate it. And a lot. We learned a lot, and the SLS test out at Stennis is extremely important and critical to the Artemis missions, right? This is actually a flight vehicle. This vehicle, this core stage that's currently at Stennis Space Center, this will be the core stage for Artemis 1, right? Which will be the first flight of the Artemis program, which will take the Orion capsule, into space around the moon and back, and test out some of the critical heat shields and things for Orion, which then leads us on to Artemis 2 and Artemis 3 and eventually to the moon. So it's an extremely critical piece of test that we're involved in here. Now, what did we learn? So I want to back up just a little bit. So we've learned a tremendous amount, right? We learned how to get the vehicle from MAF to Stennis via the Pegasus barge. We learned how to unload it. We learned how to install it in the test facility. Then we learned how to go through, we went through a series of tests to learn things about the system as a whole being integrated, right? Like the RS-25 engines. We tested each one of those individually. Have a lot of history testing the RS-25, but this was 4 engines in a different configuration than we had tested before. They were integrated into the vehicle itself. So a lot of things we didn't know about the vehicle, and that's the reason we do these tests, right? So we can learn them on the ground before we get them to the launch pad. So we learned a lot along the way. We went through a series of tests, right? We learned about avionics. We learned how to power on the vehicle. We learned how the software operates with the vehicle. We learned how to do countdown sequences. And then we learned a lot as we went along, and then we got to something that was called wet dress, right? This was the first time that the vehicle on the stand would be filled with the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen, right? So that was a critical milestone in the program of learning how to operate and fill the vehicle. And then we get to hot fire, right? So we filled the vehicle, we learned a lot, and then on hot fire day, we filled the vehicle again, learned how to transfer propellants, and then it was extremely exciting. I mean, I get talking fast when I get to this point, right? Because I was there, and this is the first time in my career that I'd ever seen anything like this. So it was super exciting. And we actually, I hate to admit it, but I was about a 30-70 guy. I thought we had about a 30% chance of making it happen the first time, right? Because all new systems, we're going to start those all 4 engines at one time, new system, and Mike, and you well know what all has to go into making that happen. There is a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes to make something like that happen. And when those 4 engines lit up, it was just amazing. And we ran roughly a minute, learned a tremendous amount, right? We had never gotten to that point in the sequence. We actually finished the wet dress. We lit the engines on the first attempt. Absolutely amazing. The engines were performing just fine, right? And then we had a cut a little sooner than what we would all wanted it to be, but we learned a tremendous amount getting through that test. And it performed just how we, as a test organization, we were not surprised in that, right? We have limits set. A lot of these things are modeled. First time you run through these, you have parameters set at certain levels. And when the vehicle saw something, the system saw something that was different, unexpected, it did exactly what it's supposed to. It safely shut things down. And that's exactly what we want to happen when we test, right? So we were extremely excited, learned a tremendous amount of information that will help us get through the next hot fire and help us get Artemis 1 mission flying in the near future. So we learned a lot.
That sounds very impressive. I want to go to Michael a minute. I know the test lasted just under 1 minute, and now we're looking at another test. When is this test going to happen, and what do we hope to learn from the second hot fire test?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks, Mark, for inviting me. And John did a great job with talking about what we've learned. And he's absolutely right. There's so much that we learned through all the different series of tests and installations and working. But the second test that's coming up, we're hoping right now that we're planning for somewhere between 4 to 8 minutes in duration. That will give us all of our objectives that we plan to have and receive for this test when we get through that 4 to 8 minutes of test. But what we're really learning again is how this vehicle during gimbling of the engines, or how the engines work. We can model all we want to model when it's in dry stage. But when you put the acoustics and you put the energy coming out of those four engines and reverberating around and vibrating around that vehicle, there's systems and connections and things that you just don't learn until you go through that series. And that's why it's important to run these tests. Let me get this phone. Sorry. Why it's important to get these tests off and do these tests in a real world, real life, full power level and full duration, so we can get all the objectives met.
And when is the next test?
So the next test is right now scheduled for February 25th. And that's a week from Thursday. And we will go into the same sequence of events that we went last time. So I would expect the test to be somewhere around the same time of day it was at the first test, which is probably mid to afternoon on the 25th.
That sounds great. And Michael, just out of curiosity, I think that cut occurred at about the time we started to gimbal the engines. What parameter actually went out of redline, out of spec?
Well, there's a hydraulic system that's required to gimbal those engines and to move. And when the demand was for the hydraulic system to start gimbling the engines, the hydraulic level dropped below the prescribed red line, and that's when it cut the engines at that point. As it should have. As John said, that's exactly, it safely shut down that vehicle, safely shut down those engines, and that's exactly what we wanted to do if there's a red line parameter that's not met.
Boy, I remember from my days in the test complex, it went very well. Don, when the next test is complete and assuming we have all the data we need, where do we go from here?
So the next step after test, obviously the folks with Boeing, the NASA folks, the Aerojet Rocketdyne folks, they'll start analyzing the data to make sure that we've met all of our goals and objectives. And once that's determined, there's some refurb work that has to be done on the vehicle and prep the engines and prepare the vehicle for shipping down to Kennedy. And right now, roughly a month's worth of work has to be done to get the vehicle ready. And then after that, we will go through we've already had our readiness reviews for lifting the vehicle out of the stand. So we'll lift the vehicle out of the stand, get it positioned on the tarmac, get it rolled back on the Pegasus barge, and ship it down to Kennedy to be integrated with the rest of the vehicle and get it prepped for the Artemis 1 launch.
And that thing takes the trip all the way around the south of Florida?
Goes all the way to Kennedy Space Center on a barge, the Pegasus. Yep.
That barge, as I recall, is a legacy barge from the Saturn V program, is it not?
That is absolutely correct. They had to do a few modifications, but you're absolutely correct.
That's awesome to hear. Michael, these are really powerful engines. As the lead contractor for the SLS engines, can you tell us how these engines help power SLS at launch?
Well, at sea level, these engines are producing somewhere around 500,000 pounds of thrust each. And so there's four of them. It's going to be just under 2 million pounds of liquid rocket propulsion thrust. And I think I'm answering your question that when all four of these are going off at the same time, along with the solids that's lifting the vehicle through the atmosphere. And yeah, your model there with the solids on the side. And that amount of thrust is what's going to be propelling the vehicle through the atmosphere and then into orbit. And then at that point, at some point along that trip, the solids drop off and finished at their burn, and then continuing with the liquid engines, the 4Rs25 engines on the bottom that we flight certified tested here, as John had mentioned, as a stage. And then at some point in orbit, those engines will have main engine cutoff, and then that core stage will drop, release, and the second stage will take over.
And these are longer than what we flew on the shuttle, is that right?
Yes, sir. I believe, if I recall the history of this, there's 4 segments during the shuttle, and there's 5 segments of each of those solid propellant segments to make up the solid booster there.
And I
So
think
there's
we
one
burn
extra.
out somewhere around 2 minutes, and then these will continue to fire up till maybe 8 and a little more, huh?
About 8 minutes. Yes, sir.
Wow, fascinating. Beautiful rocket, by the way. Proud of everybody at NASA that put that together. John, after this second hot fire test, I understand it's going to take about a month to refurbish the core stage and its engines. And I know, as you said, it's going to go down to Kennedy. Do we do any of that work at Stennis Space Center, or is that all done at the Cape?
So we'll do that in that month period of time. We'll do that refurbishment work at Stennis. And then they'll, when they get to Kennedy, obviously there'll be some more refurbishment that has to be done. They'll start stacking the vehicle, mating it with Orion, mating with all the other pieces to create the complete launch vehicle like you showed there a second ago.
Excellent. Well, I just want to say before we close, I'll thank you, COVID-19. I'll be sitting at the mainline road gate on the outside, ready for the test on the 25th. Unless, of course, something changes and you guys get me a ticket. But anyway, I understand how that works. Believe me, better safe all the way around. I understand. But I want to thank you both for joining Partners for Stennis and Michoud today. This has been a very informative and important update. And again, thank you, John, and thank you, Michael.
Well, thank you for having us.